Betty Molina Morgan grew up in a family of English learners. She's worked as assistant superintendent, deputy superintendent, and superintendent in Maryland. She's been working with Colin and Alma Powell on Grad Nation and America's Promise. Dr. Betty Molina Morgan.
Well, Tom asked me to be disruptive and to talk about the future of education. So in pondering this, easy to be disruptive. Anybody who knows me knows I can do that. It was a lot harder to think about talking about the future of education. But then I realized, like Pat Wolf, I didn't start in the Ice Age, but I did start teaching in the Middle Ages. So I've lived through this. I started teaching in the 70s. I lived through the 70s. I lived through the 80s. I lived through the 90s, the decade of the 2000s. I was a superintendent. And so that probably qualifies me to talk about the future. Because as the noted British historian Arnold Toynbee said, the past is always in the future. I've never forgotten that. So thank you, Barbara Nemko, a fellow New Yorker. We are living in the best of times and the worst of times, and I would be less than honest if I didn't talk about both of them, and that's what I hope to do. I'm a passionate advocate and believer in public education. You'll see as I go along, but we have to be honest about the things that are our challenges and the things that are our best practices and where we're doing well. Just very quickly want to give you some idea of what I do. America's Promise Alliance was founded by Colin and Alma Powell. They're amazing people. Everything you think about them is true. They're the real deal. They have devoted the last 30 years to improving things for kids in America. They have amassed more than 400 partners that do things for kids and do things for people. I don't sell anything. I give things away, which is kind of nice. Having been founded on the 5 promises, one of which is education, that's my part in the organization. And I have to say the one part that I think is still confounding us and that we're working hard on. So about 5 years ago, Colin Powell was speaking in the South, and he became aware that in this community where he was speaking, that there was the high school of that community had a 35% high school graduation rate. He was horrified by that, absolutely horrified. And so that he decided that now we were going to move into a new direction with Grad Nation. And I'll explain what that is in a little while. But through the work that we have with partners, we've identified 1,550 high schools across the country that are known as dropout factory high schools. Have you heard that term? I don't like the term at all because schools aren't factories, but it is a kind of dramatization, of the problem, which I think we probably need to be shaken up a little bit. So if we look at our test scores, here's the worst of times. I think, we're tired of hearing all of these stats, but I'm just going to summarize them to say that we know we have issues, we know we have challenges, and for me personally, I've managed to wrap all of those issues and challenges into the dropout crisis and the high school graduation challenge. So if we put an economic face to that, which I think is very important, we'll know that we've got to improve the situation of kids dropping out of school for these reasons. And I know you've all heard about our lack of competitiveness and all of that, but there's really a stronger economic face to it in terms of a lot of the kids who are dropping out of school are going to be our future citizens and compromising the economic future of America if we're not careful. So Colin and Alma Powell developed the Grad Nation campaign, which was kicked off by the president and Arnie Duncan. And Barbara Nemko, you were talking about being on Capitol Hill. My office is 4 blocks from the White House, and I go up there often, and it's scary. It's really scary. What's really scary, and by the way, I'm zipping through these, but if you want to have a conversation with me one-on-one, I'd love to. But what's scary is that a lot of these senators setting policy and making law are listening to their 28, 29, and 30, not that I have anything against them, just limited experience in education. So it's a problem, I think. This is kind of what the stats look like. And what I'm going to try to focus in on, really want to focus in on Latinos. This is what we do in my organization. We study data nationally. We have a really good handle on it. But I'm really concerned about Latinos. I'm really concerned about these graduation rates and the dropout rates. Latinos, except for Native Americans, have the highest dropout rates and the lowest graduation rates across the country. That's a serious issue because our immigration patterns, as you probably know, are changing. You see a complete reversal from where we were in the 1800s and into the 1900s of where we are now. And if you see that big red band, this is the immigration from Central and South America. And increasing number of minorities, whereas we were mostly white Europeans in the 1800s. And this is what we're going to continue to see in America. And that's why we should care about immigration patterns. This is why we should care about Latinos. Just some very, very quick demographic statistics. 7 states are so-called Latino states now. Latinos predominate in those states. They are the largest racial ethnic group in those states. In 21 states, Latinos are the largest minority. We all know that Latino students are now the largest minority student population in public schools. What's really fascinating, though, is the shift from urban to suburban. As you know, Latinos are moving out, and I was the superintendent of a rural and suburban and the city system. Was an interesting system. Our Latino population increased tenfold while I was superintendent. This is a concern because I think, as Carlos Garcia would say, our time has come, but we also have to be very, very vigilant because of the achievement record of Latino students. These demographic stats, I think, for me, create a sense of urgency to educate Latinos well, and all children well, but I think we have to pay attention to Latinos particularly, especially in California. Again, some statistics that I think are really, when you consider them, are pretty scary. So the economic imperative for the future of America, America's fiscal growth, I think is just illustrated very sharply here. That if you look at Los Angeles, we couldn't get any stats for San Francisco, this area, but they've studied LA. You can see the students lost 80,500, and you can see the economic implications of that we've lost $592 million in earnings that they would have had if they had finished high school and gone on to some post-secondary. So 1,550 high schools account for nearly half of all dropouts in America. Does that stun you? Is that a stunning statistic? It's horrific, but on the other hand, it makes the problem manageable in a sense, because we know where those high schools are, and we know the students that go there for the most part. So while the picture looks bleak, by focusing on these certain geographic areas, in particular high schools, we can really, really make a difference. This is what the map looks like of the dropout high schools across America. This is a little bit dated. We're going to be getting a new map very soon. But if you see those bands all the way across the South, and you can see California. Okay? Those are not the high schools, by the way. Those are the towns and cities where these dropout factory high schools exist. Okay, so this is what we do at Grad Nation. The goal is really simple, to get 90% of students to graduate across America by the year 2020, no individual high school less than 80%, and for kids to go on and complete at least 2 years of post-secondary. So it really increases the urgency for us to upgrade our instruction. We want to focus on upgrading instruction and teaching methodologies for the future, which now gives me a bridge to talk about, the future. I love this quote: all kids do learn, but not on the same day and not in the same way. And I think we all know that. But what are the implications of that statement? And what's the burden on the teacher? What kind of a burden are we placing on teachers who already have? And by the way, I just have to make my statement, being a passionate advocate for public education. I have not seen teachers teach better or harder or in a more focused way than I've seen in the last decade. It's amazing what teachers are doing. I thank you. And I cringe sometimes when I hear some mythologies about, this lousy teacher my child had, therefore all teachers are lousy. And I really don't like those kinds of extensions of, to me, illogical thinking. So the burden's on the teacher. We have to relieve the teacher because the teacher cannot personalize education for every student. The teacher needs supports and better tools for teaching. That's some of what we do at America's Promise. We dispatch teams of people who come in and work with communities, work with school systems, and figure out systems. But mostly what we do is we make connections to partners who can help people in communities. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. So we have to imagine a different classroom because we're going to be going into a future. It's already been stated very more articulately than I can say it this morning and throughout the day, all the conversations. We've been imagining a different classroom for at least 4 decades that I've been in public education. But I think the sense of urgency is so much greater now. And I think what will be different in the future is that our traditional notion of the schoolhouse, I think, is just going to be blown apart. We have to imagine a decentralized school structure. So imagine a situation where we go back to almost a one-room schoolhouse. The gentleman also talked about adaptive reuse, that we're using closed factories, that we're using closed retail businesses. Swinder drove me through town and showed me some of these closed shops down in Napa and said, well, we've got a lot of closed storefronts and whatnot and know that very well. But what if suddenly those become remote schools? What if now suddenly there's a church that's no longer operating in a community that becomes a schoolhouse? Moving toward a concept of a centralized tech hub. By the way, all of this exists now. This isn't anything earth-shattering. You know these teaching situations. You've seen them or heard them. But what's going to happen is this is going to explode. This is going to become more the modality of teaching and learning. And we're going to have to really do business in a very, very different manner as a result. So we have a lot of discovery learning going on now, particularly, in the STEM areas. We have kids who are able to do virtual experiments. I know as superintendent in Maryland, in our classrooms, we're all hooked into a central system that they could know every single day what the temperature was in the bay in Annapolis, and they could know what the water life was looking like there and everything. This was a daily occurrence. They started the day checking this out, and they were 100 miles away from the bay. This is increasingly going to be the wave of the future. If we look at independent study, we're going to be having students study with individual learning activity packages that will be tailored to them, that will be specialized. Well, they will be able to follow a protocol, and then the protocols are going to become extremely important, and consistency in those protocols, but complete their education. We work with a company called Apex Learning that I had in my own school system, and we had kids who just totally learned online. It was great for kids who were ready to drop out of school because they don't like any other kids in their class. They hate the teacher. They're smart kids, but they're just antisocial. So they could go somewhere and complete their high school education online, and why not? Who says they have to come in and endure the bullying of their peers and be made fun of, and not socialize? I think every kid deserves to be able to graduate in their way. So early learning, we're really going to have more and more technology at those early stages. I've seen a lot of pre-kindergarten programs. It's astounding what kids are doing, but that's going to change the whole curriculum and everything. Okay, and just, I think, Latino student strategies, this is one of the things we've really launched at America's Promise Alliance. You want to know more about it, I'd love to talk to you, love to engage you in what we're doing. But there are some different strategies for Latino students. We have to recognize them. Latino students come from different cultural groups. There's a lot of research that says Latino students don't learn as well independently. They like learning in family groups. There's a lot that has to do with language development and various things that are pertinent. So All of this, I think, is going to translate to keeping more kids in school, more graduating, because we have a more personalized view of education for kids. So if we can imagine the totally digital curriculum, it exists now, but again, I think it'll be more prevalent and at different levels with more intensity and will very quickly predominate. I think Tom asked me to go out to the future to like 2020, and I think we'll definitely be there, by 2020. We also have to recognize that we're teaching now what I call a post-literate age. The concept of reading books and of literature in the way that I did when I was coming through school and my daughters did when they were coming through school is going to be very, very different. And this will be where we're going to wage the war. Because literacy, I believe, remember, I taught in the Middle Ages, I'm medieval, reading is extremely important. Everything else is based on reading in the American public education system, and we can't minimize that. And, obviously we don't want to give bad reading methods to kids, but there's so much research now. There's so much piloting going on. There are so many tried and true programs that, I think to say things like, well, we don't want to teach kids to read in a bad way. Well, of course not, But I think we've got so much information we can teach kids how to read in a good way. We just have to use a medical model. If this doesn't work, another protocol. If that doesn't work, another protocol. Every kid must get it. Okay? Must get it. Must get reading. So, would you go to a surgeon, for example, if God forbid your child had a brain tumor, and the surgeon said, well, it's a normal curve. Some kids die and some kids live. And I'm going to try this method, and if it doesn't work, I'm sorry. Would you go to that surgeon? Would you have them operate on your child's brain? Would you continue? No. And we can't do that in education either. So the reality of the new literacy that we're going to be battling, that things are done in sound bites and reading, the text messaging age, but we can capture that. We can capture the enthusiasm of email with kids if we do it right. But we're going to have to do it. Okay, so I've been in many tech classrooms, the so-called new tech classrooms, and I'm telling you that the future is everything is a hybrid. We also had our traditional tech high school infusing it with the arts. Our traditional tech high school, which was so-called the old vocational high school, no kids took AP. They didn't take the SAT. Now all of the kids take AP classes, take the AP test. Why not? We need more hybrids. We need to really stop putting ourselves in boxes and begin to really experiment and be innovative with different models. Keeping the best of what we know in public education that works, but also taking the risks to do the exciting things. So in the end, personalized education will become increasingly more important. But for me personally, achievement and mastery will be even more important, because as kids are learning independently, as they're learning online, as they're learning from tech centers in their neighborhoods, we're going to have to really have a very good handle on how they're progressing if they're not coming to school every day. Assessment matters. All this stuff I've heard about testing disturbs me. How do you know that a kid has learned what you've taught them or has mastered it, can consistently produce what it was that they learned and can apply it? I think we're not going to be able to get away from assessment as we move into this future. But I believe that assessment has to be reasonable, authentic, and truly measure mastery. Reasonable, authentic, and truly measure mastery. And I think all students should be expected to master material and demonstrate success and growth. We can use growth models along with assessment. So actionable data will become very important for us to understand and know where kids stand, what they've mastered, what they haven't. I'm going to go through these very quickly. These are data formats that were invented by a company called Performance Matters. I worked with them as a superintendent. They do fabulous work. We had focus groups of teachers for nearly a year before they put these in place. And they developed all of these from teachers' feedback. The main thing teachers said is, I want it quick and easy and want to be able to look at this and know exactly what my whole class looks like. This will give you an idea right here. So the red is basic, and you can see very quickly with primary colors, you had basic, proficient, and advanced. I think this one will probably show you a better view of that. This is an individual student's profile, benchmark system, all based on the curriculum and the objectives the kids have to master. Kids work with these directly. They know their own standing. They know what they have to work on. They know the objectives they've mastered or they haven't mastered, and so forth. I'll go through these very fast. In Maryland, we're lucky in that we have a certain set of courses and certain protocols that tell kids that they can be accepted into the University of Maryland. This shows you another view of that, of a college prep analysis. Very easy to understand, just when you know what the numbers represent, that's all. Teachers use these all the time. We have 1,700 teachers in our school system, and we had about 170 administrators. The administrators can't be the ones only looking at data. Teachers have to be able to access it and use it, and I think what we wound up having as a result of this was a whole army of teachers who were very well versed in the instructional progress and the mastery of students. We used a lot of the scattergrams. This is kind of a comparison between 09 and 10. Not a lot of movement, but it shows you that a lot of outliers. There were less outliers in 10 than in 09. Very quickly, this is a visualization of individual teachers and then growth patterns. This will give you a better idea. This is a visualization on the left-hand side. And this is based on Florida, by the way, where they have 5 levels of achievement. Being at 5 levels, kids translate, their work translate to 5 levels. The big blue balloon there says, these were kids who were at level 4 entering in the beginning of the year, and that group in the green bubble had dropped. They were still proficient, but some kids had dropped. Okay, we're done. The last thing here, which I think you'll find interesting, is that this company has developed a metric, some school systems are using it, to measure, to tie numbers to teachers' observations and evaluations, and then you tie that into areas, and you can very, very readily identify areas of weakness that someone needs to work on. So, if you need to get in touch with me, please do. I welcome talking to people individually. I was huffing and puffing.